When Richard turned 65, he began to notice changes that were hard to ignore. His body responded differently to touch, his libido fluctuated, and moments of intimacy, both with himself and his partner, lost the ease they once had. But what troubled him most was a sense of awkwardness, as if he were losing a part of his masculinity. Masturbation, once a natural expression of his sexuality, now felt somehow inappropriate for his age. This feeling didn't come out of nowhere. Like many of his peers, Richard had grown up in an environment where such things weren't discussed openly. The word masturbation in his youth carried connotations of sin and secrecy. Decades had passed, the world had changed, but inside him remained a voice that kept saying, "This is wrong." That voice became the main obstacle between him and the realization of a simple truth. Self-care has no age limit and is not bound by prejudice. One evening, while reading an article about men's health in older age, Richard came across a line that struck him. Masturbation after 60 isn't just acceptable. It's a way to connect with your body, to release tension, and maintain emotional balance. He read that paragraph several times. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he wasn't alone in his thoughts, and that his feelings were valid. Over time, he began to approach the act differently, not as something shameful, but as a moment of solitude and rest. He became more attentive to himself, noticing how his body responded, what thoughts came up. It was no longer a mechanical act. On the contrary, it began to feel like an act of care, of respect, even tenderness. He no longer felt the need to prove anything, to himself or to his past. It became a time for inner harmony. Richard realized age isn't a reason to give up intimacy, it's a reason to rethink it. An older body isn't worse than a younger one, just different. It needs a different rhythm, different sensations, a different kind of attention. And that's not weakness, that's wisdom. From that moment on, he decided he would listen to his body, not reject its desires, but respect them. He would no longer chase what once was, but be honest in the present. And that honesty marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. When Richard began to see masturbation not as shameful, but as a way to care for himself, he was surprised to encounter a series of unexpected obstacles. He had accepted a new perspective on intimacy, yet the experience still didn't bring real satisfaction. The sensations felt dull, as if his body was responding out of politeness rather than desire. He decided to dig deeper. What exactly was holding him back from enjoying it? The first thing he remembered was how, a few years back, he had gotten into the idea that semen retention supposedly increased strength and boosted energy. He'd read about it online and decided to give it a try. At first it seemed logical, ancient practices, myths about preserving life force, but the result was the opposite. After a couple of weeks, he noticed increased irritability, discomfort in his lower abdomen, and a general feeling of energy being stuck inside. He didn't feel more powerful. In fact, the opposite, as if he were holding in something that needed to be released. He abandoned the idea and gradually began to feel lighter again. Ejaculation, he realized, is a natural part of male health, not a weakness. The second barrier was monotony. Richard honestly admitted to himself that he had used the same method for nearly 30 years, the same movements, the same hand, the same body position. It worked in his youth, never raised questions, but now his body seemed to stop responding. He recalled a piece of advice he'd heard on a men's health podcast. Variety isn't indulgence, it's a way to awaken the body. So he started, experimenting, switched hands, slowed the pace, changed rhythm and setting. At first, it all felt unfamiliar, even awkward. But after a couple of weeks, he noticed his body seemed to come alive again, responding differently, with heightened sensitivity. The third obstacle was haste. Richard caught himself still operating under an old mindset. Get it over with quickly, before anyone notices. This habit dated back to his youth, to a time when intimacy came with guilt. But now, he was a grown man, living alone, with no restrictions. He allowed himself slowness. He put on soft music, focused on his breathing, simply observed the sensations, and then he realized just how much perception changes when you stop chasing the outcome. Everything felt deeper, warmer, more genuine. By letting go of these three habits, retention, repetition, and rush, Richard began to rediscover the joy of physicality. He uncovered something new within himself, something that had always been there, but had been hidden beneath fear and old patterns. As Richard progressed in his mindful approach to intimacy, he suddenly realized that despite the inner transformation, his actions were still confined to a narrow focus. His attention, as before, was centered on a single area, as if all pleasure could only come from there. That's when he first wondered, what if the body can offer more than he'd ever expected? He started with something simple, giving himself time to explore sensations outside the usual routine. One morning, after a shower, lying in bed, he chose to listen to his body in a way he never had before. Gentle touches on his abdomen, chest, and inner thighs brought a surprising result. It was as if dormant parts of him were waking up, reminding him that his entire body was a living system, not just a means to an end. A special discovery awaited him in the areas of his neck and back. He was astonished at how responsive these zones became when given just a bit more attention. Suddenly, he found that light touches, strokes, or the warmth of his hands didn't just arouse him. They restored a sense of wholeness. He wasn't chasing a climax or aiming for a goal. He was simply allowing himself to be. With this discovery came another important realization: lubrication. It had always seemed like a minor detail. Why bother? He never used it before. Why start now? But now that his touch had become slower and more deliberate, he noticed his skin started to get irritated more easily. So he bought a neutral, high-quality lubricant and was amazed by the difference. Everything felt softer, freer, more comfortable. The friction was gone. The fear of pain disappeared. And with that, he saw this too as a form of self-care. But the deepest layer turned out to be the question of guilt. Despite all his discoveries, he sometimes felt a quiet, almost childlike voice inside. Is this really okay? It would come unexpectedly, like an echo from youth, when masturbation was hidden and forbidden. Richard learned not to push that thought away, but to face it. He would ask himself, who said that caring for myself is shameful? Whose voice is this doubt speaking in? And more often, the answer was silence. A sign that those old beliefs were losing their grip. Now, when he touched himself, he wasn't just seeking pleasure. He was rebuilding a connection with a body that had silently waited for years, for attention and for acceptance. Richard could feel that his relationship with himself had changed. Not all at once, not suddenly, but steadily. What had started as a timid attempt to overcome shame had grown into a calm, mature confidence. He had the right to pleasure, to exploration, to self-care. Yet there was still one barrier he hadn't wanted to face for a long time. Devices and tools specifically designed for men his age. He used to laugh at ads for massagers and special attachments. Inside, there was a stubborn voice. You can handle it on your own. You always have. That voice was full of pride, but also fear. Fear of admitting that his body was changing, that his fingers weren't as nimble, his wrists sometimes ached, and sensitivity had shifted. But one day, during a video call with an old friend, he heard a sincere confession. "You know, I tried it, and I don't understand why I waited so long. It's not about weakness, it's about comfort." Those words stayed with him. Richard started small. He chose a simple, soft device that promised ease and gentle touch. When it arrived, he hesitated to open it. It felt as if he were crossing an invisible line. But that evening, he decided, no more putting it off. The experience came without awkwardness or shame, but with quiet, surprised wonder. It actually felt good. Not intense like a flash, but cozy, caring, something he could sink into slowly. From that day, he understood something essential. Technology isn't the enemy of intimacy. It's an extension of attention. Like good reading glasses or an orthopedic pillow, it's simply a tool that helps the body live more comfortably. It doesn't replace feeling, but helps reveal it. And from that point on, masturbation for Richard was no longer a mechanical act. It became a ritual, not an obligation, but a way of being with himself. In this renewed approach, there was no place for hurry, shame, or outdated beliefs. There was only respect for his present self, with wrinkles, with new needs, with a desire to live in harmony with his body. He no longer chased past passion, nor compared, nor regretted. He simply was in the moment. And each such moment, filled with warmth, calm, and honesty, became proof. Age is not the end of intimacy. It is its new, more conscious beginning.